In the last video, we saw how to write the lookupAll function using the standard monad interface. So that meant instead of using specific return and do this then do that functions for the maybe type, I used the general interface functions return and bind. Now this still looks a little bit messy. In fact, indeed, we've got a lot of symbols here. We've got this greater than, equals, and a lambda, and so on. So Haskell actually provides a neater way, once we're using the monad interface, to write these sorts of functions. And that neater way is called do notation. So the idea behind do notation is that we can write these programs which are very focused on doing one thing after another, like an imperative programming language, in a way that makes them look like this. And the way we do that is to write do, and then instead of writing and then do this and then a lambda, we write L prime becomes lookupAll, and we get rid of all of this. And then same thing here, and same thing here. And then this is exactly the same function as before. The reason is that do notation is what's called syntactic sugar. Syntactic sugar is where we have a nicer surface level syntax that the programmer types in, but as far as the compiler is concerned, it gets desugared or translated away into something else. Let's just make sure this function loads first. Oops, my comment is not terminated down here. Let's make sure this function loads. And so it does indeed do the same thing as before. And the way this works is that each line gets translated into just using the monad functions. So if we have a line like this, we have do, we take the operation E1 and put the result into X, and then do E2, which may be more do notation, then that just becomes, as it was before, E1, and then bind the result to X and do E2. If we have operations that don't return anything useful, as we'll see in the next video, then we could just have do E1, then E2. And this just becomes E1 sequenced with E2, where this sequence operation is defined in terms of the bind notation by putting in a lambda which ignores its argument. So we run the first one, we don't care what it does, and then we run the second one. And then finally, if we have just something by itself, it just becomes E. So we can see how this works up here. This gets desugared to lookupAll kvs L, sequenced with L prime bound to the result. This becomes search k kvs kvs with v in the result, and this becomes lookupAll kvs r with r prime in the result. And then finally we have the final line, which just gets translated as is. So this shows that do notation is just a slightly nicer way of writing out the same thing we could have written using this bind function. But many times it gives us a much nicer way of writing the function that doesn't have this syntactic clutter over here.